And Jesus himself said that he did not come to do away with the law.
He does not take us out of this world if he does not want us to be contaminated by it.
This is the Adventist Pilgrimage Podcast with your hosts, Michael Campbell and Greg Howell.
I'd like to welcome you to the Adventist Pilgrimage Podcast, and I'm your host, Michael Campbell. Missing my compatriot Greg Howell for this episode, but we have an interlocutor, Matthew Lucio from our sister podcast, Adventist History Podcast. Welcome, Matthew.
Hey, thanks. Good to be back.
And the reason we're recording is because we're somewhere special. Where are we at, Matthew?
We are in what used to be called the Stevens Hotel right now, which has some significance in Adventist history. Now it's called Hilton.
Hilton, downtown Chicago. And we're here in Chicago because we're having the 2025 annual meeting of the American Society of Church History. What's that like, Matthew?
This is my first time here.
Yeah,
and
so tell us.
I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting, to be perfectly honest with you, I was expecting a much bigger event. I want to say maybe we have 150 or
150, maybe 200 at most. Yeah. Attendees. So it's a small group.
It is a small group, which is nice.
By the way, those that are listening, small group as compared to the American Historical Association, which often concurrently meets, but this year is in New York City, where you'll have 50, 60,000 people, or Society of Biblical Literature, American Academy of Religion, again, like 40, 50,000 people. So a couple hundred people, really small conference compared to those other bigger meetings.
Yeah, it is. But I think that also means you just get to have conversations with people.
A little more intimate, right?
Yeah, much more intimate.
Get to know more people, a little bit more, not just walking across hallways, but people are saying, hey, and by the way, your first conference, I have to applaud you, a grand debut, because when I first saw you, Matthew, you shocked me because I looked at your name badge, and I was thinking, independent scholar. That's usually how we go if you're not like a teaching professor or somewhere, a PhD student. And I just about died laughing because right there, and this fits you so perfectly, Matthew, was Battle Creek College. Squeezed in some Adventist history, going to a church history conference, right. Matthew.
That's right. Class of 74.
Class of 74. 150th anniversary or whatever. And that's hilarious, Matthew.
I had fun with it. I did have somebody, I was introducing myself to somebody who was sitting near me. He had great socks. And of course, you can appreciate somebody with great socks. I love great socks. And he's like, oh, where are you from? And he saw Battle Creek College, and he's like, never heard of that before.
That's so funny. You should have just said it's now a community college or something.
Right. It did make me wonder, does Andrews kind of own that now, or can somebody restart Battle Creek College? I don't know.
I think they're this true successor of Battle Creek College. So
they are.
Yeah. So it is what it is, but it's kind of fun. I'm glad you're here for your class reunion.
Yeah.
So
not seeing very many of my classmates here after 150 years. So.
Yeah. Well, you look rather timeless. You aged very well, Matthew. So, we're here at this conference, and so for those who have not ever gone to one of these things before, maybe this isn't necessarily your cup of tea or your wheelhouse, but this is actually my 25th year going to these conferences. I went when I was still an undergrad student. I think I would have been a senior, and and so I went to they were meeting that particular, and the president of the society was Ronald Numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And so I walked in, the presidential address, sat down, didn't know what he looked like, sat across the table from him and his spouse at the time, and then of course I knew who he was once I heard his name, because he had written the book, the rather infamous book on Ellen White and sources and health reform, Prophetess of Health. And he gave the address, which had nothing to do with Adventism, but I think he was very intrigued that here was a young person interested in church history. And so we had a veggie burger or two over the years and heard his story, sometimes a painful story. But anyway, so we've had a number of Adventists, former Adventists, people, whether they would, some kind of Adventist connection, that have been involved with the society over the years. So it's kind of neat to There's different kinds of ways of doing history. You can do history where you only talk to yourselves. And there is a certain role for that, a more apologetic kind of history. And there's also a different kind of history that happens where you try to explain where does Adventism fit in the bigger picture. And at a conference like this is the perfect opportunity because there's all these other historians.
Yes.
And they're like, oh, Adventism. Yeah, I should know more about that. And,
right.
And so it gives you these opportunities to have these conversations.
Yeah. Now, there's probably 15 or maybe a few more than 15 Adventists here, which I was pleasantly surprised about, given that we only have 150 or 200 people here. Large contingent of Adventists. But, Michael, back in 2000, or when you first started coming here, were there very many Adventists coming?
For the first, and of course, I didn't go every year because as a student and graduate student, you can't afford to go every year, but pretty much no. I'd say for the next 15 years, and I would go every maybe 2 or 3 years. It was Ron Numbers and myself were pretty much the only historians. A few interlocutors that maybe popped up once in a while, but it has been it's been very lonely, to be honest. I go to a lot of conferences, but it's kind of there's a loneliness. Like I wish more Adventist church historians, whether they study Adventist history or some other form of church history, would come to these meetings because I think it's a beautiful opportunity for these conversations. Yeah,
and I think for those who are listening and maybe wondering, look, I represent you if you've never been to one of these before, and that is like we don't have to be afraid. There's a lot of curiosity here. There's genuine interest. I've noticed in a lot of the other scholars. There's no hostility
like, I want to disprove your beliefs.
Or why are those weird people here?
Actually, there's even, I would say, a curiosity like, tell me more. I don't know anything about Ellen White. I don't know anything about Adventist history. How can I find out more?
Right. Yeah. They want to know because they want to understand. Like, that's why they're here.
So you have to come.
So, you have to come and don't be afraid of some of these other scholars. A lot of Mormon representation here.
Okay, I've been honestly jealous because since I've been going to these meetings, the Mormons have almost always had 2 paper sessions. So a paper session, for someone that doesn't know, that's where you'll have plenaries. That's where the famous scholars who are established and written lots of books will give a presentation, and everybody listens. But most of the conference is what's called paper sessions. So 3-4 papers, or maybe a panel of people comment on a book. But the most common is people doing their own research. And so they'll present, and you'll have a commentator, some expert in the field that will give feedback. And then usually there's dialogue with those who are in the audience. And so, and when I would first come to those, some people would get really roasted. Like people would... But I found overall in the last 10, 15 years, people are very friendly and want to encourage people, especially more junior scholars, not to roast them and humiliate them, but just say, hey, I came to one of these conferences, I was looking for a source, and someone said, hey, I know where to find the source you're looking for. And it was so amazing that I could have someone with some real experience and interest and genuinely trying to help me. And so I found that so valuable as part of these meetings. So tell me, you went to a paper session or 2, Matthew?
I did. I got to hear a presenter named Heidi Campbell.
All right.
And while it wasn't in Adventist history,
what was it on?
Here we go. It was on...
This is the test.
Yeah, well, okay. So the title was, what was it? Was it Trouble in Paradise? It was about anti-Trinitarianism.
Yeah.
And so I was privileged.
1600s,
Yes, I was privileged enough to talk to the presenter a number of times since then. You may have heard of her before. But no, she did a great job, and I thought the comments that she received afterwards were broadly supportive. And I heard a great paper on Methodism in Texas. Okay. And how their narrative, like their theology, lent itself to manifest destiny and to American empire and these sorts of things. So that was interesting. I learned about Mormon midwifery,
all right,
and medicine.
You never know. Hey, back to being jealous about all those paper sessions on Mormonism. So
I mean, it really it gets you thinking, like that we don't. We have a wonderful framework, I think, in Adventist theology that we haven't really thought a lot about collectively as a people. We were having a conversation tonight at dinner that our interest in this Day of the Dead is almost purely that we're right and other Christians are wrong. we don't really have a theology of death. We haven't really thought it through on a biblical
it's more
level.
of like an apologetic.
Yeah. We kind of got to the...
By the way, of our listeners, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but also just thinking through where do these things fit in, right?
Yeah. Right. And, and what else? I mean, I think just asking more questions beyond that initial question. An initial question is, which day is the Sabbath? Is it Sunday? Is it Saturday? Okay, that's a fine question to ask. It's a very important question to ask. But then, can we get beyond that question and ask, well, how are we supposed to observe Sabbath, and what is it meant for? And these sorts of things. We can go beyond the initial questions we ask and dive deeper. And Sabbath is one of those areas, I think, that we have developed our theology in over the years. But anyways, so I'm encouraged as I see Mormons diving into their own history and just really mining it. I'm like, man, we need more of that too. We need more Adventist historians.
Love it.
So, hey, if you're on the fence out there, this is your recruitment call. You're thinking, I like Adventist history, but I don't know. Please, we need you. Yeah. We need you. We need to see you at the next conference. And
it's not exclusive, right, Matthew? You just came, and here you are, first time, and then but people have been welcoming, haven't they?
They have.
Yeah,
they've been fantastic.
And by the way, just I'm really excited. The last 10 years, just about every year, we've had one paper session now on Adventist history. Some of you know the Oxford Handbook of Seventh-day Adventism.
I've heard of that before.
Hey, and that came out of a result of one of those paper sessions where one of the book editors at, would you believe, Oxford University Press sat through one of our paper sessions and subsequently had a conversation with him talking about what would it take to have an Oxford Handbook of Seventh-day Adventism. And now, not quite 10 years, but 7 years later, here we have it coming out in print. But that happens through that networking at conferences. Yeah. And this year, this is a humble brag, but we have 2 sessions.
We do.
Specifically on Adventism. One on Ellen White, one on Adventist history. So if you stay tuned with this episode, we're going to do it a little bit because everyone has very crazy busy schedules getting ready to give their papers. But we're going to try to give some little nuggets, some snippets after our conversation, Matthew, so that some of our Adventist scholarly colleagues can give us a little, just a little tidbit as to their current research and what they were presenting about. So that's part of what we're going to try to do. But I'm so thrilled. Finally, we've caught up to the Mormons in their historiography. It's taken the last over a decade, but here we are. So I'm excited. We have about 15 Adventist historians, scholars, different points in their careers, people that all the way from PhD students to some of our senior historians, and so it's a great opportunity for those conversations. And what I love, I give a paper. I'm one of those giving a paper tomorrow. I'm always a little bit nervous when I'm about to give a paper because you never know how's the respondent going to respond.
I have some really hard questions.
I figured you will. I figured you will.
Really hard.
So I never know what's going to happen. So I'm a little bit nervous till I get the paper out of the way, but at least I love the fact that there's other people that have an opportunity to ask questions for that dialogue, for those conversations, and that helped to sharpen my own research so that the goal is eventually to publish this research somewhere. Yeah. So that so my research becomes better for it. And
that's right.
For someone that may not be familiar, that's part of what makes historical scholarship. It's not to say, hey, look at how high and mighty I am because of whatever academic degrees or whatever. It's what I think is the most valuable part is this peer review process. And that means other people who are very knowledgeable and say, hey, by the way, have you thought through your research in this way? So helping to make sure that you stay as sharp as possible. And so that then it also challenges me to how do I explain what I believe in my historical understanding and analysis in a way that someone who doesn't know anything about Adventism, so that makes sense to them as well.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I mean, the real blessing to me being here is the conversations you have with people in the hallways, in the lobby of the hotel, whatever. Like just being able to talk with like-minded people who are passionate about history and are curious to learn. Like that is a balm. Yeah, it is a balm for your soul because you can't have these kinds of conversations everywhere. Yeah. And everyone is busy. Everyone's working on something. So whenever you get everybody together, fantastic conversations ensue. Yeah. And I think what you said is really important because, you guys out there, you may read a book that Michael writes or somebody else writes, but it's like we're showing you a little bit about how the sausage gets made here. It all comes from relationships that you build with people who point you to sources, who help strengthen your arguments, who whatever. And then through that process, a book gets into your hands. But it's we've got to look positively, I think, at the relationships we can build with other people because they help everybody.
Just another example of that is having gone to these meetings now in the last 10, 12 years, it's been pretty much every year for their main annual meeting, is that I'll meet somebody that's editing a new encyclopedia and say, you know what, I don't know any Adventist, but I should have an entry on Seventh-day Adventism, or I should have an entry in the Millerites or on Ellen White. And they'll say, would you write that? So after I wrote the first couple of entries for some major reference works, and suddenly other people saw my name in those, and then right away, I know that guy from American Society of Church History. Yeah. Before I know it, I'd written a whole bunch of these different encyclopedia entries. It's not because I'm a great scholar. It's just because
you're available. You're
sometimes you just show up. You show up, and I'm thankful because it could have been someone that has no real expertise or knowledge, or perhaps it could have even been someone that's hostile. And again, I'm not here to do it in an apologetic sense. I really want to do it in the best historical tradition of being objective and so on. But you could have somebody that actually could try to put a jab in there to try to
they have an axe to grind.
And so it's to our advantage. As historians, I think that there is a sort of a prophetic calling to do history as well as one can, to work hard at one's craft of historical research and documents and trying to be objective. And of course, we all realize that's impossible, but we strive for it anyways. Yeah. We try to do the best we can, and that's where the rules of the game are. Is we hold each other accountable. Like hey. You're not talking in a historical way. You're not being objective, and so people can kind of test the waters a little bit and say, "Hey, I know you can do better." And I even heard that tonight. There was a great session where there was a Catholic scholar giving some arguments and a very famous Protestant scholar who really pushed back rather strongly, and it made for a very delightful evening conversation, listening to them kind of banter back and forth in a very polite, very professional way. But again, that's what the historian's craft. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. And ultimately we do this so folks like you can read about it or hear about it in a podcast or something. And we hope that it blesses you, and I hope that it encourages you. And we really hope if you're on the fence thinking I'm really interested in history,
we definitely need
how do I get plugged in? Like, don't be scared. Don't be scared. Just come join us.
Show up for these meetings. They happen every year. And there's other gatherings of the Association of Seventh-day Adventist Historians that doesn't happen as often, but once every couple of years. And so these kinds of professional meetings, these are, you don't have to be a professional historian. You can just come.
You can be from Battle Creek College.
Battle Creek College. Thank you, Matthew. Well,
so we look forward to bringing in some of these presenters.
Yeah, so listen, as we, I guess we'll put a wrap on this here so that you can just tune in. So listen now as we interview a couple of those who are giving papers here at this conference.
All right, so as promised, sitting down here with Shawn Brace and Kevin Burton, two presenters who present here at the American Society for Church History. And you guys, I wish those of you who are listening could have been a part of this, because I think you don't get a sense, when things get published later, you don't get a sense of the energy, the vitality of a paper presentation, and getting some Q&A, getting somebody responding to them, and you having the conversations before and after of how excited people are. And I think, let me just begin with this. It seems like after the Ellen White section, there has been some energy, some excitement about maybe we're finally turning the corner in Adventist studies, and attracting some attention from outside scholars, from non-Adventist scholars who are interested in Ellen White in particular, as well as maybe hopefully some renewed vitality among Adventist scholars themselves of like, hey, let's re-engage with Ellen White, like let's dive into this. So anyways, I think we're at an exciting moment right here, but I just wanted to stop and ask Shawn and Kevin, what's your impression about the conference overall, and specifically how the two Adventist sections of papers went. Shawn, let's start with you.
Okay. I was encouraged by the fact, we were just talking about this as we walked here to record this, that the respondent to our particular panel, John Corrigan, he was mentioning how it feels like this is a moment where, like 40 years ago, Mormon history was kind of first starting to surface, and how it contributed to our understanding of American history in general. He feels like maybe we're at the beginning of a moment for Adventism with that. And it was really neat to hear that. He's not an Adventist himself. But in particular, I was appreciative how he felt like our three papers, Kevin's, myself, and Jeffrey Rosario, did shed light on the larger American context. So I think that's really exciting to me. I also appreciated in the second panel, where it was focused on Ellen White, how David Holland, who is, he's a non-Adventist scholar at Harvard, is shedding light on this, and he's coming out with a biography of Ellen White. So there is awareness that is being raised, which I think is really cool, because as I was also explaining, as I was first starting into the study of U.S. religious history, it was frustrating to me that these other movements, especially Mormonism, gets all this attention. Yes. It's like, well, where are the Adventists?
Right.
And so it's really exciting that there's more attention being given.
Yeah. It's crazy that we have a biography of Ellen White coming out, and I don't know if he's going to get to publication first, by a non-Adventist scholar before an Adventist scholar.
Yeah.
But Kevin, what are your thoughts on especially the two Adventist sections?
Yeah, I mean, same sort of take as Shawn in general. I think we have been for a few years now, sort of on the cusp or at the beginning of. It's hard to say, and it's weird to say it if you're kind of a part of it, to be like talking about how we're entering a new era. And it's probably been that way for maybe the last decade or so. Yeah. 2014 was a pretty significant year for Adventist historiography when we had the Ellen G. White Encyclopedia that technically has a 2013 copyright date, but it came out in January 2014. Then we had the first volume of Annotated Letters of Ellen White, and we had the Oxford Ellen Harmon White book that came out. And so those are three significant publications, only one of which, the Oxford book, really got some non-Adventist attention. And it kind of has fallen a little bit, silent-ish. But we're at the point where there are several publications that are about to come out again that are going to be in non-Adventist presses, and we are continue to do more and more work at these non-Adventist conferences. And so I do think that Corrigan is probably onto something. And Matt Sutton had said something similar when Michael Campbell, Jeffrey Rosario, and I presented at ASCH a few years ago. Yeah, this idea, and he compared it with Mormonism again, that Adventism is starting to get to the point where we want to be part of a broader conversation. This is super encouraging to me personally. I mean, I remember doing my PhD work at Florida State University, and I actually got kind of frustrated one time in a class with Amanda Porterfield, and I was like, why does no one talk about Adventists? Yeah. And I got a little emotional about it, like frustrated, kind of emotional about it, which I guess I am a little embarrassed that I let that happen. But regardless, I will never forget her response, and it was, well, where do they fit? Where do the Adventists fit? And I realized, actually, I don't even really know. Yeah. I have a better idea than most other people would because I do Adventist stuff. But that to me has been sort of like a clarion call challenge to see where do we fit in the broader story, to know, and that will help us know Adventism better. Yeah. And will help us to understand where we fit better. Yeah. But it will also help other people understand Adventism better. And so it benefits, I think, everybody in this regard. And so, I think that this conference gets to that in a significant way, because it's probably the first time where we've ever had two Adventist panels at this conference. Michael Campbell's been pretty good, and we've had a few of these in the past, but we had 2 this year.
Yeah.
And they were both fairly well attended, especially since they were in the morning on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And that was encouraging. And I just hope that this will continue to bear fruit, but it will take persistence, I think. Yeah. We've got to keep doing this and keep coming back and keep having these conversations and keep getting to know people. And I think that will happen. Yeah, I think that's made this year particularly notable.
Yeah, I've noticed a theme, especially with Jeffrey Rosario's paper, that corresponds to what you're saying about how Adventists have just kind of been ignored or just not noticed is maybe a better way of putting it. Mm-hmm. It's not that there's an intentional effort out there to not see Ellen White or not to know anything about Adventism. It's I think maybe we can say we didn't do a great job of positioning ourselves within sight on a scholarly basis, right? We haven't talked with Michael earlier in this episode. This is his 25th year of coming to ASCH or ASH. I guess we can pronounce it however we want. Michael is insisting on ASH, but I was asking, were Adventists coming here in the early days? And he's like, not really, or sporadically. Right? Yeah. We haven't really made a concerted effort, unlike what I think the Mormons have done in the 80s when they started showing up in force. Presenting their papers, and you can't help but notice them then. Yeah. So it seems like we're doing a better job of standing where we will be seen by the people we want to be seen by, and presenting our subjects for their consideration, but also I was really enjoying David Holland's presentation. Basically asking the question, why hasn't more been done on Ellen White?
Yeah, right.
And it's like, well, how do you want to slice it in terms of membership? There's more Adventists than there are Mormons. He mentioned medical institutions, but we could go into schools and other things. Like in terms of institutions, there's a lot of Adventist institutions. So I really do hope, and I don't know if this is the next year or the year after is the year in which things start to exponentially increase the number of papers on Adventists, but hopefully it'll be soon.
It'll take time, though. I mean, academic work is slow, and so seeds may be planted, and they've already been planted. But we'll have to probably look at this not in years, but in decades. Yeah, which is unfortunate in some sense because we will only see part of this in our own lifetime. But we are, I think, in the process and have been in the process for a few years of doing better. I mean, another thing. In the recent era, the Oxford Handbook of Seventh-day Adventists, that's a significant thing that will bring more attention to this broader field. Yeah. And I think it's our most mature work. Ben Baker has shared that with me personally, and I think he's right. That is our most mature work to date.
Yeah. But let me ask you guys, because we're at this conference, we're kind of in this atmosphere. For those who may be listening who are like, yeah, I have an interest in Adventist history, but why does it matter whether other scholars, Adventist scholars or non-Adventist scholars, notice us and write on Ellen White, write on Adventist subjects? Like, how does that, they may be looking at that and saying, how does that benefit me as an Adventist? Mm-hmm. Right? Like the Oxford Handbook, it may help explain Adventism to non-Adventists, but how does scholarly interest in Adventist studies benefit Adventists?
I think Kevin put his finger on it. On the one hand, it can help us understand Adventism better because it helps us see the larger context and situates us within that context. It also, I think there's some benefit to having outside scrutiny because we all have our assumptions, our blinders. Yes, and so having other voices, I'm going to be really intrigued by David Holland's biography on Ellen White because he's going to be able to see things in her that the rest of us probably can't see. Mm-hmm. And so it helps us, it helps us understand our own assumptions and history better because we don't see it all. And we have a lot of assumptions and inherited traditions that we have a hard time distinguishing from maybe what is truth.
Yeah, I think it goes a bit beyond context too. I look at the academic study of religion really started taking off in the late 19th century, and one of the sort of founding fathers of this is someone named F. Max Mueller. And he is starting this project with this idea of comparative religion. And one of his challenges to scholars of that era is he sums it up in the phrase, he, or we can now add she, he who knows one knows none. And it's this idea of, okay, if you only study if you only study Christianity or maybe a particular kind of Christianity, how do you know what religion is if that's all you study?
Right.
And so I really think it's true for Adventism. If we only study Adventism, then we don't really even know what Adventism is, because a lot of people assume that Ellen White's like the only prophet in the 19th century, right. And that's so not true. It's so not true. But how does she compare? Yeah. What is similar? What is different? And then what does that mean? How does it help us understand her? We are engaged in the anti-slavery movement or religious liberty. Well, so are a lot of other people. Right. So how are we different? And what does that say about our identity? Yeah. Well, and so this stuff is crucial for every Adventist, really.
I would say, adding to your list there, anti-creedalism. A lot of Adventists happen to think, Adventists were these, exceptional anti-creedalists, but it was really pervasive in the 19th century. I think one of the reasons I like to study history is because it encourages me to be more humble about my convictions. Yeah. And so when I realized that, hey, this idea didn't come down from heaven, it was also present within the wider context and culture, it allows me to be a little more open-handed. It doesn't mean I give up my convictions. It just helps me understand that there are human elements at play that gives me more humility in the way I hold these convictions.
Yeah. Now, Shawn, you're a pastor, and so I'm wondering, is there a way some of this information or the things you're studying, because you're also at University of Oxford, how do your studies make their way into your sermons?
Into my sermons?
How do they get to? Do they get to your people? Is this the way?
They certainly do. I mean, we could go on for hours about this, Matthew. But preaching is actually one of the least exciting parts of how this stuff would play out for me. What propels my particular research is how to create community and how to, what are the boundaries of inclusion and exclusion. Yeah. So the way I relate to my neighbors, the way I invite them into faith and that sort of thing has implications. The way I relate to the Bible, one of the things that has been most intriguing for me is understanding how Adventists in the early history related to Scripture and just the way we know what we know in general, what is a big fancy term, epistemology, is understanding that there is a distinction between 19th century Adventist epistemology and what my neighbor next door living in Portland, Maine, a very secular city, how they relate to truth and all that sort of thing. Yes. But to answer your question, it does find its way into my sermons as well. It's transformed the way I preach because of my understanding of the historical context of Adventism's, developing theology and so forth. Sure,
very good. Look, guys, there's a lot more we can talk about. I want to talk to everybody. This should be like a 6-hour episode, but it's not my podcast. It's Michael's podcast, and he already flew out of here, or he's on his way to the airport.
Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for abandoning us. Co-hosted by Greg Howell, not present. Michael Campbell, no longer present. No. He did a great job organizing some.
Michael is really the straw that stirs the strength.
Yeah, he is. He got us a dinner.
Kudos to him. Yeah, he bought us all dinner, but he also organized both of the sessions. Yeah, and that's really appreciated.
Yes, and he got this podcast started, even if he wasn't able to be here to finish it. I do want to leave everyone who's listening on this note. You guys can't see us, obviously, but we're sitting right now in the Chicago Hilton, which formerly was known as the Stevens Hotel. And this, when it opened in 1927, was the largest hotel in the world by rooms. I think they had 3,000 rooms. Doesn't have that many today. And the significance, I think, for Adventist history here is that this is where they held spring meeting. The General Conference held spring meeting in 1944, and where they formally approved the creation of regional conferences. So we're sitting in the hotel right now where that took place a few years ago. And so, anyways, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Adventist Pilgrimage. I'm sure Michael and Greg will be back for your next episode, so don't despair at having to hear my voice. Your mom and dad will be back. No worries. The babysitter will be gone.
I just want to thank Shawn and Kevin for joining us for this episode as well. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
And Jesus himself said that he did not come to do away with the law.
He will not take us out of this world if he does not want us to be contaminated by